Maru. Same question again. I mean, looking at the barriers to immigration reform and speaking to the question from your perspective, the perspective of the immigrant community in regards to the dignity dialogues.
Thank you. Well, I guess, and I want to mention the dignity dialogues. We actually had two last night, one in Burlington in Espanol, and another one at Western Washington in English. So it was really interesting to see these two dialogues happening the same day, and the similarities and the differences in what a dignity dialogue is precisely to give the opportunity to people to dialogue about immigration reform, defining what immigration reform means to you, because lately anybody can say immigration reform. It really means different things to people. And what we do in the dignity dialogues is that we take a look at immigration policy that had been introduced last year in Congress. So people get a chance to read summaries on that and then read the details, the most important details, and see what similarities are on each of those policies. Based on all the dignity dialogues we've done across the state, I lost track. I don't know how many we've done, 15, 20, who knows. In two languages in different geographical areas. We put together a document that we presented to Senator Murray in January. We're not the only ones doing this. This is happening at a national level. We join with other organizations, grassroots organizations mainly. But this is not surprising what we found throughout these dialogues. This is something that at least the Latino community has been saying all along. First of all, I totally agree with the lack of leadership. We see that, we don't have to repeat it, no leadership in that sense, and there's many reasons for that. But if we see historically the way immigration policy has been designed, it's to supply labor. So we haven't gotten away from that. I think the other barrier that we've seen is racism and the way media has adopted the term illegal. And how nowadays, whenever you see a headline about immigration, the word illegal will be right there. And we're still trying to fight that, because once you define a human being as an illegal, then we're losing the battle. So we need to go back to human rights. We're talking about human beings. Definitely the anti-immigrant movement has been really, really tight with Nazis and racists all across the nation. We see what happened to the Lou Dobbs show. We see what happened to the Glenn Beck show, that maybe some of you from Auburn remember. And how the 9/11, the post-9/11 effect took on immigration. So the right wing was really successful in tying together immigration with terrorism. So how do we get away from trying to define immigrants as human beings, staying in that sense and taking away from the fact that when we see policy on immigration reform, it's all about enforcement and people being terrorists, being criminals, whereas immigration law is a civil system. It's not a penal code. So we see all these responses throughout the dialogues. Why do we begin policy with enforcement first and legalization, somehow legalization at the end? Well, I think that the other barrier, and one of the most important barriers for immigration reform right now, after we make that analysis, is the fact that somebody does benefit from the lack of real immigration reform, and that's corporations, private corporations. We know that the detention system became a private detention system right after 9/11. We have GEO Incorporated here in Washington State, managing the detention center as a business. The budget for the Department of Homeland Security increases every year, whereas education and healthcare decreases. But the most important thing is to recognize that our own country is not part of, and it hasn't ratified the UN Convention on Rights of Migrant Workers and their families. So whereas other countries at an international level have ratified this kind of conventions, we haven't. So we still define that goods have the right to move across borders freely, but not people. And I was just having a conversation before we started this this panel, and it was interesting to, yeah, most people don't want to recognize that we cannot stop people from moving, but we still feel the right here to even deport them, to stop them from coming and then deport them. So I guess that the biggest problem that we immigrants see is the fact that we're not recognized as human beings with the freedom to move, and especially that we have a responsibility to our families to provide for them, and that makes us move. So the root causes of us moving to countries, industrialized countries, comes from the fact of the economic policies of these countries that create the reasons for us to move. So if you talk to immigrants, majority of us would say, I would rather be in my country. Why would I leave? You're right. Why would I cross the border? Why would I go through hell? There was a report from Amnesty International last year, actually just a year ago, that was released on human rights violation at the border between Mexico and the US. And it starts with the lack of data. There's no real data on the kinds of violations of human rights for migrants. Why? Because what we've seen is that neither the Mexican side nor the US side take into consideration people that are migrating and the things they go through, such as rape, kidnapping, harassment, slavery, human trafficking. We just started to put a light on human trafficking, but people don't want to take a look at what migrants are going through when migrating to different countries. So this is not a national problem, it's an international problem, that we created the economic conditions for people to move, and we still don't want them to move here. We made them leave their country because there's no jobs, they're losing their lands, there's no education. Even if you graduate, there's not a chance for you to get a good job or a job at all. So once people go through the hell of the going through the border, there's no legal protections. That is why we became the scapegoats and the target of all these violations. But once you get here, once you went through all these abuses, they don't stop. Immigrants get harassed at job sites. The immigrants don't get paid. Immigrants will be denied home rental. Then we have the problem with enforcement in so many areas where people are afraid of, like Sheriff just mentioned. So many people, I remember in Linwood when we were organizing, we had the problem of especially this place, an apartment unit, where some gangs were coming in and they were stealing things from people and breaking into their cars. But no immigrants would be reporting any of this because they say, well, we know that ICE is at the police station. And if we call the police, ICE is going to come. We know who they are. We know who the gang members are. But we're not going to tell because we're afraid we're going to be taken away. So this just increased the problem of gang activity in Linwood. And the funny thing is that Linwood police asked ICE to join because they had a gang problem. And it didn't get solved because people that knew who the gang members were wouldn't report them. And after going through all of these abuses, most people get detained and then get to be sent to the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma. And as I say, it's a business, it's being run as a business. In GEO, last time I checked, we're charging the federal government up to $100 per day per person. And the capacity of the detention center is now up to 1,600 people, and they call it beds, they don't call it people. If you are in the detention center, and if you have no money, no problem, you can work, $1 a day. So isn't it ironic that we are detaining people because they're working without a permit, but we make them work at the detention center for $1 a day. Back in 2007, there was a person, we got the statement, he organized 100 other guys to go on a hunger strike because they had been working for a month and they didn't get paid. By the time we got the media there, he was deported. Another violation that happened at the detention center, and we have it documented, is the fact of that a woman was detained and sent to the detention center when she was 7 months pregnant. When we find out through her daughter, through one of the vigils organized by Community to Community, her daughter was coming to see her. She told us the story. We were able to talk to her. She had been in the hospital twice because she couldn't get all the nourishment she needed for her and her child, because the diet at the detention center is just terrible. And the fact when somebody goes to the hospital, from the detention center to the hospital, that means it's a really terrible case, because they don't allow people to go to the hospital, and their service of healthcare in the detention centers are minimal. So she's sent twice to the detention center, to the hospital. We're able to get her some media going there. By the time we are this close to get to the media to film her pregnant in a jumpsuit, she gets on a plane and she's almost deported, but they just put her on a plane so the media wouldn't reach her. They let her go because they were afraid that how bad would it look to have a 7 months, by that time 8 months pregnant woman in the detention center. Next thing, we don't know anything about her. She went underground. She wanted to have her baby, and she was told, you have your baby, but you have to get out of here. So she went underground. We don't know where she is now. So this is a circle of abuse. We have no leadership, you're right. We have enforcement only. If we continue with this definition of immigration reform should be enforcement only, should be supplying labor for employers, we are not going to get real immigration reform. We need to move aside from that. We need to come back to human rights. We need to stop using the term illegal. That should be the I word from now on. And we should also stop the privatization of the detention system if we really want to talk about immigration reform, which I think is the next question.